Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I welcome Leo Cheung. Leo and I met on Instagram, and his handle is breakuprecoveryleo. And in this episode, we discuss how breakups are an opportunity for us to heal ourselves. Leo shares his journey of going through a breakup and how he was able to heal himself. Leo also shares the 4 stages of a breakup based on his own experience. At the end of the episode, if you could leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Leo, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Super grateful for you to come on here and have this conversation with me today. We've been fortunate enough to touch base offline, so I'm really excited to have this conversation today. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and talk about some of the work you do, and then we'll get on with our conversation from there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast with you. I am an emotional freedom techniques practitioner, and I work with people who are recovering from a breakup, who feel that they can't be able to let go of the relationship and find closure. And so I help them using this technique. It's a somatic tool for them to be able to address and release their emotions so that they can find a sense of peace, or that they're able to enjoy the little things in life. And a lot of this was inspired by my own breakup several years ago, and really having a tough time getting through the emotional experience, feeling like I was back in my own body, feeling alive, feeling excited about life. And yeah, I was stuck in that place for, I'd say, a good 3 years, and feeling like, maybe I'm just going to be like this for the rest of my life. Just because I'd tried everything.
Yeah.
I'd done everything possible to try to get over this breakup, but more so just get over this feeling that I was having in my body. And so when I discovered emotional freedom techniques, I was really amazed with what it actually offered and was able to do for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I've been fortunate enough to have another guest who also specializes in emotional freedom techniques. So fortunately, I'm aware of it. But I guess from your standpoint, like when it comes to people that are, because you said you specialize more so with people that are dealing with breakups. So in that sense, what are some of the things they can do when it comes to this technique, and how is it different than some of the other things that people may be dealing with?
Well, in terms of the technique, when someone uses it for themselves, because it is also a tool that you can use by yourself, you don't have to use it necessarily with a practitioner. It is a self-regulation tool. And so oftentimes when someone has a breakup, it is placing a stress, an emotional stress on the nervous system. So using this technique, which is tapping on acupressure points on the body, you are also regulating your body. And so if you're feeling a lot of intense emotion like anxiousness, fear, sadness, then tapping on those points and using the statements can help you ground some of those more intense feelings.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because breakups are another way, whether it's especially with relationships, we feel a lot of emotions, and I personally, I don't think we talk about that enough, and that's something you and I discussed offline too. And even the fact that you mentioned it took you 3 years roughly to kind of get past that. We almost try to minimize the impact breakups can have, right? And either we downplay the significance of the experience, or we try to move on to another relationship rather than going through that healing process. Do you mind kind of sharing some, details around what it was like for you over the course of the 3 years, and looking back now, obviously you're in a better place and you're looking to serve other people. Looking back, like in terms of the gratitude you have from that experience, maybe if you can share some insight on that as well.
Well, it took me 3 years because, as you said, I minimized my emotions. And not because I actually wanted to, it's just that I didn't have the tools to actually feel and express and release my emotions. And so that's why I was going about it in a very haphazard way and just trying to improve my life in order to feel better. So
Mm-hmm.
after my breakup, I thought, well, maybe I'll just change careers. That will make me feel better. If I change this career, I'll also have an opportunity to make more money. So at least I'll feel better about myself. And I did that, and I actually made more money. I lived downtown. I was in a nicer apartment. I was even in a new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But despite everything on paper being much better, the internal experience, nothing had really changed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, those are all external things. I also saw a therapist. I also joined a men's group. I also read a lot of books. I was very deeply connected with personal growth communities. So I wasn't necessarily ignoring my inner growth either, but that type of growth wasn't really addressing the emotional experience that was unresolved with my breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just going about in what I call the hamster wheel of self-improvement, thinking that I'm moving forward, I'm moving forward, I'm moving forward. And then I hit this wall. This is what I describe in the 4 stages of a breakup. I hit the wall. And this wall is where you realize everything that I've tried to do hasn't really done anything. And then when I hit that wall, it's somewhat shocking because that's the point where I just give up. Like I resign. I'm just like, fuck, I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I can, and I'm still feeling this way. What else can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Sometimes it's a great awakening when you hit that wall because you then have this realization, wow, it's actually because I haven't really resolved my breakup. Or it's just a ongoing feeling of, for me, it was like numbness, melancholy, just accepting life as being dull. And luckily, I was able to come across emotional freedom techniques. I didn't even know that that's what I needed.
Yeah.
And through the process of doing certification, of getting my own coaching, receiving sessions, then I actually felt the cloud lift from my head, from my whole body.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing not just, sure, I felt better, but it opened up a whole other door to not just that relationship, but all of the other times I felt abandoned, where I abandoned myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I got to actually learn, wow, I don't have access to my emotions. Now I know what it feels like to feel my emotions and to express them. I know how to tune into my body to know what are my boundaries. I know how to ask for what I need now, or
Mm-hmm.
at least I'm learning those things now for the first time
Yeah.
because of the opportunity that that breakup gave me.
Mhm. So yeah, I mean that's amazing, and there's many things you touched on that I want to obviously explore. I think the biggest thing you mentioned was right after the breakup you were seeking external validation, and I've been guilty of that, and I feel like a lot of people tend to do that. And for me, it wasn't necessarily searching for another job, but it was similar things. Going through a breakup a few months ago, it was like, okay, maybe I need to jump into another relationship. That'll help, that'll heal me. And to your point, I think until you don't sit there and do your own healing, you don't really understand how your patterns and behaviors are repeating themselves, right? How can you feel your emotions so then you can express them to your partner? How can you set better boundaries so you're not abandoning yourself? Because if you're not doing that work, you're just sitting there getting angry with your partner or having resentment for them, and vice versa, right? So I think there is an aspect of work and healing you need to do. And to your point, it is a continuous kind of journey, because once you're in a relationship, you continue to get tested in different ways. And that's your opportunity to show up differently. And meanwhile, you're learning how to communicate those things. One of the things you touched on was the 4 stages of a breakup. Do you mind expanding on that for the listeners?
So these four stages is what I experience, but also what a lot of other people report in terms of how they experience going through a breakup and their attempts to recover.
Hmm.
And so these aren't so much the internal stages, but what someone does when they feel those feelings come up or feel the pain of the breakup, what it's typical for someone to do. And some may jump from stage 4 to 1, 2 to 3. So it's not a linear path. And I'll also pre-frame that uh, I have compassion for myself and anybody else who may make these quote unquote mistakes
Hmm.
along the way. So this is just so that for the viewers and the listeners to understand that if you're there, just know you're not alone and know that you're not doing anything wrong. It's just to give you some insight. So the first stage I call the fall. And the fall is like the experience of someone pushing you off the cliff. Because a breakup can feel that way, even if you know it's coming. The separation is this devastating feeling of falling and everything coming apart in your life. And you're falling into the ocean, and this is the ocean of emotion. All of these um, mixed emotions of sadness, panic, fear, longing. You're trying to tread waters in these emotions. And oftentimes people doing it alone because other people don't understand what it is you're going through. And you're just trying to make it through the day.
Hmm.
Right? So that's often the first stage of where you feel this shock. I don't know how to move on. How will I ever feel happy again? Will I ever meet someone like this person again?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to add, I guess one of the things that I've experienced when you go through that first stage, as you've described it, is that fear of being alone. And I think most
Mm,
of us are worried about being alone. And and I was, yeah, that was my biggest fear. And until I didn't really like sit my ass down and do the work and get comfortable with being alone, I didn't appreciate it and how valuable it is. But I think that's one of the things that really impacts people, don't you think?
yes, yes. Yeah. And I think that fear of being alone is natural. It's the fear of being alone and being abandoned is a primal fear because we are wired to be attached to other people.
Hmm.
And it is our nervous system and our body's job to ensure that we are connected, because if we're all alone out in the wild, then we're going to be eaten by a tiger. That's how our bodies remember, or how it's wired.
Hmm.
So it is now using our conscious mind to be able to recognize it is okay to be alone, and it is okay to experience your feelings and to witness them,
Hmm.
and to discover what the gift is in being able to be alone. So what is your experience over the past few months for you about being alone? How have you
I
been able to do that?
I think it's just being getting comfortable with it, like just um setting up a routine where I'm doing things and taking care of myself almost, like in a way, this may sound cliche, but loving myself, right? Prepping meals for myself, going and doing things that I enjoy by myself, like going to the gym, playing sports. Recently I started, like, if I was craving something, I'd go to a restaurant by myself and sit there and eat. It's things like that I think in the past I was afraid to do alone, whether it was fear of judgment or fear of just missing that companionship. But I think by being able to gift myself that time, I've been able to really embrace it, but at the same time get comfortable with it. And it's been huge in my healing, by getting really comfortable in that space of being alone. But at the same time, I think there's a in that solitude, I find like I'm able to reconnect with myself and reflect on so many things and come up with so many answers about what it is that I want to do, what my purpose is, and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I can really hear you embracing the gift of what a breakup can offer, and
Hmm.
that aloneness, because it is a very vulnerable experience. But when you stick through it and actually spend the time alone, it sounds like you're able to see that there's a lot of reflections, a lot of things that you can turn back to in terms of your life and what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So yes, if one is able to be with their aloneness, then that first stage becomes easier.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, those first few weeks, it's hard to be alone. And so many people will reach out to friends, reach out to family, and depending on the relationships that they have with their friends and family, sometimes they can exhaust them. They
Mm-hmm.
just continually talk and talk about the breakup as a way of trying to release the emotions or the heaviness that they feel. But more often than not, talking about it helps temporarily, but it doesn't actually get to the root of being able to release the pain and hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I know for myself that there were some friendships that I exhausted and
Yeah.
and and felt like even more alone because they started to push me away in subtle ways, and I felt like, oh, I can't really go to them for support
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then it goes into stage two. Stage two is what I call craving. And that's where you start to really feel the distance from your partner. And part of that distance is activating again the nervous system where it used to have somebody who you could co-regulate with. And that's a good thing. When you're
Mm-hmm.
with a partner, your bodies co-regulate with one another and your emotional well-being is dependent on one another. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just how we're designed. And having that separation, our bodies think, okay, we're not safe anymore. Who am I going to go to in order to feel my sense of well-being? And so it starts yearning for the partner by thinking about them constantly, wondering what their whereabouts are. It happens and manifests in ways of like, let's check their Facebook.
Yeah.
Let's find whatever way that I can to track them. And it's not anybody's fault for having those thoughts. It's our body's doing its job to get back to a place of safety.
Mm-hmm.
But those obsessive thoughts can make someone feel like they're going crazy.
Yeah.
Right? And that they're out of control. And so one of the quick and easy ways out of that experience is, as you said, jump into another relationship. Let's just get into another attachment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or let's go into stage three, which is self-improvement. So people fall into the hamster wheel of self-improvement
Mm-hmm.
because if I can't change my internal experience, perhaps my external experience will help me through this. And this is for me was an unconscious motivation. I didn't even know. I just thought I just got to do something. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
sit in this place of craving, right? So usually someone gets to a place where they have this sense of low self-esteem. They have a lot of self-loathing. Why me? They don't love me. To
Mm-hmm.
like, I got to do something about it. They turn and flip it over to a sense of anger, rage, or self-entitlement, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just part of the cycle of grieving and moving forward. But if it's not used in a healthy way, it could be just displaced as let's just improve our life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's also not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, yeah, changing your external circumstances is actually good for you. But is it doing it? Are you doing it for the reason of avoiding your emotions and the experience from the breakup? Or is it really simply because I have goals and I want to go after them
Mm-hmm.
alongside of recovering from my breakup?
Yeah. And do you find like in those situations, like, I've seen it quite a bit, not maybe something I've experienced myself too, but not to that kind of extent. But I think a lot of people feel like they gave up so much of themselves in the relationship. Now they're like, okay, well, I need to do me. And you
Mm,
hear that quite a bit. And you almost see this overcompensation on the other side where it's like, oh, I'm just going to like do things for myself and like spend money on myself or go on
mm,
vacation. That too, I think is like, it's not really a healthy way of dealing with it, especially if you're not recognizing how you're overcompensating. You're basically shifting. swinging the pendulum the opposite way.
Mm,
What are your thoughts on that? And is that something you see, whether it's with the people you work with or something you experience yourself?
yeah. Well, my experience was I had a breakup with the same person twice. So we were together, we separated for a year, we didn't talk. I thought the relationship was done, and then we got back together. And then she broke up with me again. So that second time, I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to let myself go back to that place of feeling hurt.
Mm,
I'd shut down my emotional um, attachment and essentially my feelings. I shut down my feelings in order to do exactly what you said was like, I'm just going to focus on myself now.
mm,
I put on a protective armor and I just said, I'm never going to let myself feel that way again.
mm-hmm,
And it helped me at that time because I didn't want to go back to that place. So I don't also have any regret or shame about going through that experience. It's what I needed at that time. But eventually I also hit the wall, as I said. And that was when I was actually ready to feel everything that needed to be felt.
mm,
So, to some extent, I needed to feel my own sense of self-worth and self-esteem through external validation, enough that I could feel secure with who I am, that I could now feel my emotions.
mm-hmm,
So, as I said, I don't have judgment on myself or anybody else for the stages that they're at. It all comes in the time that it's meant to. But if you
mm,
have the awareness to know, yeah, I know there's unresolved stuff and it's getting in the way of me really living my life fully, then that's usually indication, yes, it's time.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, to your point, there's really no judgment. I think we all kind of go through it in our own time frame, and we need to process it in our own way. It could take months, could take years. I don't think there's really, you could put a time stamp on it, or I think you heal in the amount of time you need to, and grief can take time, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people, I think where breakups get undermined, as we touched on earlier, is because it is a form of grief and we don't typically consider it that, right? I've experienced, like, even when we were talking about stage two, when you're trying to talk to your friends, and you either burden them too much or you exhaust those relationships. I was on the other end. I tried not to talk about it too much because I'm like, I don't want to burden my friends, or for them to be like, oh, this guy's annoying, like, get over it. So for me, it was like, oh, it's okay, it happened, whatever. But I didn't really accept that grief, and give my honor those feelings or emotions.
Yeah, it's certainly a grieving process because if we look at what actually happens when we separate from a relationship, one is this isn't the case for everybody, but it was the case for me. I haven't seen my ex ever since then.
Mm-hmm,
So it's like a death of a person. However, it's different than a typical death because you really cannot see that person ever again, and that's a known fact.
mm-hmm,
Whereas if you're still wanting to be with your partner, but you know that you can't, there's this open-ended death of
mm-hmm,
somebody that you know you can't be with, but there's always that inkling of possibility. So you're grieving something that is hasn't necessarily fully died because they still exist in life.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's a very unique type of grief there.
Yeah.
And then there's also the death of the relationship that those two people have built. And so that entity, you'll never have that relationship again.
Mm-hmm,
Even when my first breakup happened and then we got back together, it had to be a different relationship. But I'd never gone through that grieving process between that year. And so I wasn't really even present for the second one. I wasn't even really be able to contribute to the second relationship. And so it never really took ground. I was
mm-hmm.
still living in the past from my previous one, still feeling the hurt and the pain. And I think she may have as well. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's many layers of the grief, and then
Yeah.
when we we really dig further in, usually it's tied back to other moments in our lives where we may have felt abandoned, and so it's an opening of grief in all aspects.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That death part, really resonates for me because that's something I've reflected on recently too. And it's crazy when you think about it, right? Like if you've been with someone for years or, even months, you've built this, relationship and friendship, and all of a sudden it's gone, right? And to your point, most often you can't have any form of relationship with that person because of the history, right? And especially if you want to move into another relationship, it's hard to maintain even some sort of friendship. And even if you did have a friendship, it will never be the same. So it's crazy, right? Like you were with this person and you obviously loved them and cared for them, and now you've transitioned to a point where you don't ever even talk to that person again. You might not even ever see them again. And even if you do, you have to pretend like they're a complete stranger. And I kind of find that a little bit sad because I'm like, why does it have to be that way? Because you know you obviously cared for this person at one point, and obviously if you're not grieving that loss, I think it's so important to grieve that loss as part of your healing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, and it is sad. It is sad that I can't see this person again or have a relationship with them. And I know that I couldn't because it would just bring up so much more pain, and it would get in the way of my grieving process. So, for anyone that feels like they can't see that person and they might have any guilt around that, just know it's actually for your own emotional well-being, and probably for the other partner too, if they are wanting to do some healing around their ending of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, it can be minimized that, oh, it's just a relationship, just a breakup. You can move on, just date somebody else. When really, on a soul level, it's a it's a sacred transition, and
Yeah.
there's opportunity for rebirth as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, we went off on a tangent, but I think you were about to get to stage 4.
Stage
Yeah.
4 was what I was talking about, was the wall. So
Oh,
once
okay.
they get to the place of doing everything that they possibly could, you just get to a point where you're like, realize, wow, nothing's changing.
Mm.
You throw your hands up. And I recall being there. Sometimes it's the wall and you hit your head against it. And sometimes it just slowly comes towards you and you realize it in a gradual way that I don't feel alive. I feel
Mm-hmm.
dull. Yeah. And
Yeah.
what actually helped me get over this wall um, wasn't necessarily a good thing. It was a panic attack. And I don't necessarily I can't say with certainty why that happened, but my suspicion is that it was just over the years of suppressing my emotions and not addressing them. It has to come up in one particular way or another. And so that was one of my insights to realize, okay, I've hit a wall. And the panic attack felt like going back to stage 1, just going back to the fall, right? And so that in itself is a cycle. It's a hamster wheel of its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes.
No, sorry, I was gonna say, I think, along that journey, and as you've described all 4 stages, I think there's different cues and flags for us, if we're really open to them, to recognize that maybe we're not doing the healing. And just like you, I felt like I hit a wall, like maybe it was 2 or 3 months ago, and I realized that, okay, as much as I'm doing the self improvement and I'm doing all the right things, I don't think I'm fully healing because I haven't been able to uh, focus on one thing. And I think for me, it was kind of like a wake up call, kind of put it that way. But I think along the ways, there were cues all along, and I just ignored them, or part on a subconscious level, I probably didn't want to admit it. And until I didn't really face it and do that inner kind of reflection, I think I wasn't ready for it. And again, like we've kind of discussed until this point, everyone has their own process and it takes time. You can't really at the beginning of a breakup be like, oh, 3 months in, I'm going to finish stage one. 2 months
Yes.
after that, do stage three, stuff like that, right? So I think we all need to go through that process.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, and I know that what I've shared today feels like it's really grim. Like how do we actually do the inner work, as you said? And so part of what I'm trying to create for people is when someone is in stage one and they're in that sense of turmoil, they're trying to tread water in their emotions. I let people know that there are actual tools and things that you can do to help you feel like you have a life raft. And those things are, one, the yoga practice that I offer to people, and it's
Mhm.
about 20 minutes. And within that yoga practice, to do belly breathing, to allow the breath to fill in the belly, because that is also something that will help to regulate your nervous system, so that you're letting your body know it's actually safe to be here without this other person. Because actually, in reality, it is safe. We're
Mhm.
alive, but it feels like it's life or death.
Mhm.
And so when you get that baseline emotional stability, okay, you probably are still sad. You probably will still miss them. You'll still have that craving, but you have something to anchor to. Then we can work one-on-one and do emotional freedom techniques. That's what I encourage people to do. To then go to those more uncomfortable places in the breakup and in the relationship to process those emotions so that they don't stay in the body. That's the point, is if they stay in the body, then the next time you get into another relationship and something similar happens, it triggers those unresolved emotions like fear or anxiousness.
Mhm.
And then your body's going to do what it needs to do, is to either shut down, react, pull away, and you then can't open yourself up to love and intimacy and connection the way that you want to. It's still remembering what happened in the past.
Mhm.
So that's the work of, instead of escaping the waters of the ocean of the emotion and just climbing high back up onto the cliff, is now we go down and under into the subconscious mind and our emotional body, so that we come out reborn in a new way, so that you aren't living from the past. You're living from this new place of actually being complete and whole within yourself,
Right.
finding that closure within.
Mhm. Yeah, no,
Yes.
that's very important. I guess kind of to shift gears here slightly, one of the other things I wanted to kind of discuss with you was there's also, and I think we talked about it offline, but there's
Mhm.
also an aspect of shame that comes with breakups. It's almost like a failure, or you failed at something, you failed at a relationship. Um, so I mean, I've experienced that. I kind of avoided talking about it initially, just because I felt like, well, I had all my eggs in one basket, and now it's like you're almost kind of like ashamed talking about it. I don't know if that's something you've experienced, or you get talk about with people you work with. um but you also touched on how breakups can be a gift. It could show you parts of yourself that need healing. It could show you parts of where you probably weren't showing up as your best self. So, if we're able to reframe breakups as an opportunity, just like anything else, where, failure is considered an opportunity to learn and do better, I think maybe there's a different narrative there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I would say that feeling shame is common. Certainly felt shame after my breakup, because it opens up all of the ways in which I felt insecure about myself. I know that being left, I felt like, oh, I must not be enough. I
Hmm.
didn't do enough. Or there's something about me that they don't love or accept. and that's why they left me.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, these are my own narratives, and I'll never really know, but these are the core beliefs that I have about myself. These are my own limiting beliefs. And so it brings up shame about who we are fundamentally as a person. And so I also agree, if we can reframe this as an opportunity to finally reconcile with those parts of ourselves, that I do accept and love who I am,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how I am, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly that opportunity. And so for me, it's far less about forgetting this ex, feeling good again. That's the initial benefits of working on yourself. But then it's coming to a place of, wow, I'm willing to accept this part of myself that I wasn't able to accept for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I wanted to touch on is like people's tendency, I find myself included at times, is where, you have this resentment even after the fact. You have this anger, obviously, you have this bitterness. And I think, again, if we're able to shift that a little bit and look at, okay, well, I obviously love this person at some point. And even though I'm angry with them, or I don't like them right now, but it's having space in that sense that, okay, this person was a crucial part of my life, and we may not be together today, but it's honoring that relationship in the sense that there are a lot of great things. I can only speak for myself, but there's a lot of great things that I learned about myself while in the relationship. I learned from this person. They showed me a different perspective on life, because my perspective was fairly narrow, and most of our perspectives are narrow based on our how we've been raised and our life experiences. So it's always interesting to get a different perspective on life from someone else, especially when you're that close. So I think it's having gratitude for that, as well as the other thing is people have this tendency to forget the rituals they had with their ex-partners. And I think I don't know. I kind of struggle with like just getting rid of everything, and just holding space for all of those things you had together, and having gratitude for it.
Yes. Yeah. Ideally, we'd all like to be able to get to that place where we can still have a high regard for the relationship, for the partner. I know for myself, it took me a little while to actually get there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would try to fabricate that in my mind, because I know, okay, this is a good perspective to have. I forgive her. She did the best that she can or could. So did I. However, I knew it wasn't genuine. Like I was really trying to just put it on. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why is I still hadn't resolved the emotions underneath. It was still a very cognitive process. And so I think that, again, it's so important to be able to address and release those emotions so that we arrive to that place from a genuine insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes really through the body, because that is our natural state, is to have compassion, is to have empathy,
Mm-hmm.
is to understand that relationships are impermanent. But without getting rid of the dirt, it's hard to see what's actually underneath.
Absolutely. And it's not easy by any means. I don't want to understate the difficulty, because I think it is normal. And even like myself, as much as I like to think that way, I think there's often times when I get triggered and I get angry, and I think that's part of the process of healing, and that's something that will happen. So I just want to make sure people that are listening have compassion for themselves too, knowing that this is a difficult process to go through, and it's not easy, right? There's a lot of emotions involved, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of grief. So when you do kind of get angry or resentful, just have compassion for yourself, because you're also human, right? So yeah.
And I think you're also a great demonstration of where you were before and where you are now, because of the effort and the work and the
Mhm.
time that you spend with yourself. So Yeah, I really acknowledge you and where you've started from and where you are now to be able to like share this with your viewers because I can also understand too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. And like I said, it's not an easy process, and I don't think, to your point earlier, the healing is a continuous journey too, right? And
Mhm.
we all have setbacks as part of our any journey we can go on, and I'm included in that. And I think the reason why I think this topic was important is, first of all, I wanted to kind of debunk the whole notion of breakups being something to be ashamed of, right? But at the same time, also understand how we can heal ourselves. Because for me, I touched on it. The tendency was, okay, I need to find another relationship so I could get that validation. And I think once we can use breakups as an opportunity to validate ourselves, and once we can do that, we can show up in future relationships in a much better state. And I wanted to kind of highlight that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And if I could offer a route in which the audience can do that is my view is one, you must have the tools that allow you to be with yourself. So as you already expressed, you have this time that you spend with yourself. And so that's where I share with people these self-regulation tools so that you can actually feel comfortable being with yourself first. I also think that in order to go through this experience, it's important to also have community and not just like a CrossFit community or like a hiking community. It's a community of people who are also going through a breakup. So
Mhm.
I have a breakup recovery group where everyone can support and share their experience and let each other know that they're not alone because grieving happens in community
Mhm.
and the healing from grieving happens in community. And then finally, there is a process that I have one-on-one using EFT to help them find the emotional closure within and detach emotionally from their partners. So it's that sort of like three pillars of being with yourself, being with the community, and then being with someone who can guide you through the emotional experience is what ultimately helped me through mine.
Mhm.
So there are, although it is a non-linear path, there are in some ways a roadmap to help you get through it in a I wouldn't say effective, but in a graceful way.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And Leo, I want to thank you for having this conversation with me and being vulnerable and sharing your own story. So I appreciate you for that. And for listeners that want to get a hold of you or find you or want to, learn more about some of the techniques you offer, what are some of the best ways they can do that?
Best way is to find me on Instagram. I am posting reels and videos on there. I also talk to people one-on-one through direct message. So you can always message me and I'm supporting people there all the time. And so my handle there is at breakuprecoveryleo. And then my website also tells everybody about my story and my breakup. And it's breakuprecoverycoach.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Leo. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Loved your questions and it was a great conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode. As always, please subscribe to the podcast if you enjoy the episodes, or leave a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Thank you again, and until next week.